On today's World Insight with Ken Wei, Chinese Vice-President Wang Qishan in the Middle East to drum up diplomacy and innovation. And an iconic bridge further connecting Hong Kong to China's mainland. Will infrastructure bring about integration? Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Ken Wei, the program coming to you live on CGTN. Chinese Vice-President Wang Qishan has gone on a four-nation tour of the Middle East. First stop Israel, where he met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday. In the next 7 days, Vice President will visit Palestine, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates. Let's take a look.
The most senior Chinese official to visit Israel in nearly 2 decades. On Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu welcomed Chinese Vice President Wang Qishan in Jerusalem. Mr. Netanyahu called Wang's visit a big compliment to Israel and a reflection of the growing ties between China and the Jewish state. Israel is often referred to as the tech hub of the Middle East, earning the name Silicon Wadi. The match between Israel's core technology development and China's huge market has been an area of interest between the two countries. A highlight of the Chinese Vice President's trip will be his co-hosting with the Israeli Prime Minister of the 4th meeting of the China-Israel Joint Commission on Innovation and Cooperation. Looking to expand business and trade opportunities, the Vice President is accompanied by a group of Chinese business leaders, including Jack Ma, the CEO of the Asian e-commerce giant Alibaba. Israel's traditional alliance with the U.S. hardly stopped it from forging closer ties with China. As Israel's largest trading partner in Asia, China has also been a fast-growing source for Israel's tourism. The number of Chinese tourists to Israel rose by 41% in 2017. After Israel, the Chinese VP will travel to Palestine, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates, where China seeks to help grow trade and investment. China hopes a stronger economy will help usher in peace for this part of the world.
What to expect from Chinese Vice President Wang Qishan's visit to the Middle East? In Beijing, we have Li Guofu, Director of the Center for Middle East Studies with the China Institute of International Studies. And in Hong Kong, we invited Philip Metodi, the founder and Chief Executive Officer of Duotem Capital Limited. He is the co-author of the book, Israel and China from Silk Road to Innovation Highway. I want to welcome both of you gentlemen to the program. Mr. Metodi, obviously it seems the book title has already been translated into reality, but the question is, when it comes to innovation, to what degree will the two countries be able to cooperate, China and Israel?
Well, thanks for having me here. Obviously, this visit is very important, and it's not because Vice President Wang is the highest-ranking official from China to visit Israel for almost 20 years, but it is knowledge of Israel. He's an absolute expert in history of Israel, and above all, he knows technology and what's happening in the Israeli ecosystem very, very well. Now, the fact that he's chairing the Chinese side for this Joint Innovation Committee, having Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister, as a counterparty, really shows that both parties take this initiative very seriously. The business exchange and bilateral ties have increased dramatically over the last 10 years, but our view is it's just the beginning. I think we'll see much more activities over the next few years.
And Mr. Metodi, of course, people love to hear about the positive side of the story, particularly when there's an important visit going on between the two countries. But one has to point to the other side of the story as well. Right before Chinese Vice President visit to Israel, there were certain reports circling around suggesting high-level officials in Israel military suggesting there is risk involving China too much, in his word, in cooperating with Israel, particularly when it comes to infrastructure and innovation. Mr. Metodi, your thoughts about that?
Right. Let me tell you, I think both sides are very pragmatic. Obviously, the relationship between Israel and China has always been very complex. Having said that, since both sides have made it very clear that there is this political will to increase, these ties and this cooperation, I don't believe that these concerns are legitimate. We are still seeing an incredible amount of new investments coming from China across the board, from medical to health care to water to cybersecurity. And there are obviously concerns, but I don't think, as I said, they're legitimate. And again, I think we're just going to see more and more of these exchanges between the two countries.
I see. Mr. Li, from China's perspective, what do you make of those apparent concern from some of those in the military in Israel? And what about the general picture as China sees it?
I think, as you stated, some of, the forces or some of, the elements in Israel, they have raised this issue of security. They are afraid that, if Israel depended too much on China, especially these very sensitive, high tech and also, some technologies, and especially, as our friends said, some, the issues China and Israel do not see eye to eye. So they said, they would like some of the Western countries to set up sort of mechanism to see or check, the deeply involved of China, especially in the areas of high tech.
Well, that is their thought. That is their thought. But Mr. Li, when I'm asking about your thought, what do you make of the reality so far?
I think, generally, I would say, especially, under the leadership of Premier, Netanyahu, he viewed China as, the rising power, and he once said that, the Israel is very small, and some way it depends on the outside powers to guarantee its security. And from the historical point of views, both Jewish people and the Chinese people, we don't have any conflicts. What we have is very closely sort of relations, especially the Jewish people are very sensitive for the Chinese, especially during the Second World War.
Right.
We have received a large number of Jewish refugees from the Europeans. So, Netanyahu is determined. This, we call it the strategic shift to have a good, close relations with China.
Well, there might be words about that, as we know, and widely reported in the media, but how to see that? I mean, Netanyahu, as the Prime Minister, certainly understands between China and the United States, which is the biggest ally of Israel, by the way. There is an apparent trade war going on. There might be very different things that the two countries are not seeing eye to eye on. And also, what would that mean for Israel's potential with China? Will they limit it to mainly economic and trade ties, Mr. Metodi?
Well, it's very interesting that actually this willingness to increase ties actually comes from both the public and private sectors. You mentioned in your opening remarks that Jack Ma is part of the trip. Jack Ma was actually in Israel in May, and he believes that Israel is one of the 3 most important countries for China. Now, again, I think we should downplay the concerns about the military and the growing role in China. And I give you one example. The ports, 2 of the biggest ports in Israel,
Haifa, for example,
are operated by Chinese companies, Haifa and Ashdod. So they are operated by Chinese companies. If you travel throughout Israel, you will see that the bridges, the tunnels, the major infrastructures are all built by Chinese companies. So they are obviously, because Israel is a true democracy and probably the only true democracy in the Middle East. So it's normal that some people would debate, but again, I would downplay this, and I think that the relationship is strong and the relationship is getting stronger.
We'll see how the relation is going, particularly with quite a strong foundation, at least when it comes to trade and economic ties. If we take a look at this, China and Israel have traditionally close economic ties. China has been the top market for Israeli exports in East Asia, and it is Israel's 2nd top export partner after the United States. China also Israel's third largest trading partner and export market after the U.S. and the European Union. There we go, a lot of numbers over there certainly indicating the significance of China both as a market and also as a trading partner with Israel. By the way, if we study the numbers, Israel's export to China jumped 60% just within the 8 months and the 10 months that we have seen this year compared to 2017. Very impressive. Meanwhile, China's export to Israel 10% as well. So you see the trade ties is certainly increasing. But Mr. Mattoldi, how should we understand this? Is this about two countries, particularly China, looking for alternative markets? Is it because the U.S.-China trade dispute and therefore Israel is having more trade opportunities in China? How should we understand the numbers with a bigger context?
Right. First, we have to understand that even if the numbers have increased dramatically, they remain quite small.
That's true.
The business relationship with China only represents 5% of the Israeli economic activity, which really shows a tremendous potential. Now, the relationship between the two countries is what I define as a perfect match. Cost of labor in Israel, as you probably know, is extremely high. So Israel wants to focus on highly value-added products, R&D, technology, and more Israeli companies are looking at China to manufacture, their products. Likewise, even if technology in China has improved dramatically, they have realized, and this is again what Jack Ma and a couple of very large business people have said, they realize that Israel can make of China what it wants to become, meaning a major technological superpower. And I guess there is this political will to make it happen. So I think we have reached the point of no return. This is going to happen.
Mr. Li, of course, this is the second time Jack Ma, one of the most well-known entrepreneurs from China now for the world, has been to Israel. That has been mentioned repeatedly by our Israeli friend, Mr. Mattoldi. But Mr. Li, China also has its own concerns when developing further relationship with Israel. For example, when it comes to the issue of Palestinian issue, the two countries certainly have very different opinions. And of course, Chinese Vice President after Israel visiting Palestine as well. So with that in mind, to what extent China can free-willingly, in a way, develop its relationship with Israel besides trade and economic ties?
I think for quite a long time we have tried to persuade our friends, both the Palestinians friends and also Israeli friends, for the long term or the fundamental interests of the two peoples, they need to make peace. And even for the Israelis, to some extent, on some issues we do not see eye to eye. But fundamentally we have to make sure that we wanted the Israel to survive and the security, and we also want the Palestinians the rights also should be guaranteed. You can see that our policy towards both the Israeli and the Palestinians are very much balanced. During our Vice-President Wang Qishan's visit to Israel, he also will make a visit to Ramallah and to have talks with the Palestinian Prime Minister. And also, we try and make our efforts to promote the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. And we also try to make close relations with Palestinian people. At the same time, we go further with our friends in Israel.
Of course, we are already quite familiar with the photo of Chinese Vice President Wang Qishan placing a prayer of peace at the Western Wall in the old city. And that certainly is a peace message coming from, I think, representing the Chinese, really, from China for people in the Middle East, whether they are Israelis or the Palestinians. By the way, having said that, though, when it comes to real innovation cooperation, there has been several deals likely to be signed, already signed. Science and technology, life sciences, innovation, digital health, agriculture. These are areas that Israel which is quite strong when it comes to technology. But Mr. Matodi, to what extent, once again, Israel is willing to share on a commercial basis with China and others about these technologies, and how will that be able to advance the true and the genuine nature of this cooperation between the two, Mr. Matodi?
Okay. The relationship, as I said, has been very strong for many years, and actually we backdate the strong relationship between the Chinese and the Jewish people to the 2nd century. Now, having said that, there are so many opportunities. You mentioned healthcare. Definitely China has identified that Israel could be a major healthcare player in the Chinese market, and we see a very large number of Chinese investors coming to Israel looking at healthcare technology. Now, clean tech is also an area where Israel is very good at, whether it's waste management, it's water purification, water desalination. As you probably know, the largest desalination plant in China, which was built in Tianjin, is actually built by an Israeli company. Now, it is very, very obvious that Israel wants and needs to develop this relationship with China. Israel probably has one of the strongest economies in the OECD. It has high growth, it has low inflation, it has no unemployment. But in order to sustain this, the Chinese market is actually the engine that will allow Israel to continue to perform.
Mr. Li, Belt and Road Initiative, of course, that's going to have a big impact on many of the Middle Eastern countries, those in Europe and also Eurasian areas. But to Israel, what does that mean? And to some of the other countries and places that the Chinese vice president to visit, Palestine and several other Middle Eastern countries, what would that mean as well? Is this going to, in a way, clear the way for doubts and therefore let the real cooperation projects get underway?
I think, we see that the Israelis are very, and active and positive to receive the Chinese initiative of One Road, the One Belt, One Road, this initiative. And for the Israeli side, on one hand, to end this framework, if both sides, join efforts to promote this, One Road, One Belt initiative, can closely, link two countries, cooperations. On the other hand, because China had a very good, reputation, we have every friends in the Middle East. We see that the Israelis economic approach or its orientation is always towards the Europeans. By closely join the Chinese this initiative, Israel can make some friends and the framework to working closely with the regional countries, the Arab countries. I think this is part of the Israeli, what they think they can do, and also China can do.
All right. But on the other hand, about the Belt and Road, there have been quite some debates recently about the idea, particularly the implementation from different perspectives. And Mr. Matodi, what would that mean for Israel's decision about how much to cooperate on BRI, and to what extent can Israel contribute to the further of the idea of BRI? After all, it's an initiative raised by China, but it's about partnership. Therefore, it's not just about China, it's about everybody joining in to make things happen. Mr. Matodi.
I always like to compare the One Belt, One Road policy with the Silk Road. And needless to say, the reason why you have still today a fairly large Jewish presence in the historical cities of the Silk Road, whether with Hong Kong or Shanghai or Singapore, clearly shows that this has been in the Jewish and Chinese DNA to collaborate. As I mentioned earlier, this is a fact. Something that I want to emphasize as well, it's very important for China to have access to commodities. And obviously, Africa offers a tremendous reserve of commodities. And if you want to bring commodities from Africa to China by land, if you look at a map, it has to go via Israel. And this is what China, together with the Israeli government, are looking at some major infrastructure projects that would facilitate transport of goods from Africa and the Middle East into China.
But Mr. Matodi, another bigger question, even more than just the Belt and Road, is the general debate that is going on in the world about trade, about nature of trade, about direction of trade, about how trade will be done for the future. You know that better probably than I do. So therefore, what role is Israel going to play in that global debate? Which direction Israel hopes the world head for?
You know, I think Israel would be no exception to any other country that is not directly involved in the trade war between China and the US. So initially, these countries that are not directly affected will benefit, especially countries that are export-oriented. Now, if this trade war results in a slowdown of the global economy, obviously these economies are also going to be affected. Now, as you rightly pointed out, it is possible for two friends to disagree on some matters. And again, I think the relationship between Israel and China is getting closer by the day, but there will be areas of disagreement, and I think it's a healthy part of a relationship.
Mr. Li, briefly before we go.
I think the Israeli can play a very positive or active role in especially China's we call the trade war with the United States, because Israel is very close friends of America, and also at the same time very close friend of China. And the Jewish people knows much better than the Western countries about China's culture, philosophy. So Jewish people, especially Israel, can play something like a go between how to make China and the United States more understood by each other.
We hope that will be the case. Thank you so much for now. With the two of you, Li Guofu, Philip Matodi, really appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen.